Hello, everyone. My name is Kevin Kiley. I'm the Communications Director here at the University of Wisconsin Clinical Trials Institute. And on behalf of our entire team, I want to welcome you all to today's special discussion. Last week, we celebrated the National Clinical Trials Day. Clinical Trials Day was established to provide an opportunity to reflect upon and recognize all that has been accomplished thanks to clinical trials and the people behind them. This includes not only the many outstanding clinical research professionals at UW-Madison and UW Health, but also our courageous patient participants, two of whom you'll meet today. Our participants are critical partners in our effort to move medicine forward and help improve the health of individuals and communities in Wisconsin and beyond. So we want to send heartfelt thanks to all of you on campus and in our community who go above and beyond to help advance clinical trials innovations at UW. You all are part of a community effort that truly leads to research rising toward a healthier future for all of us. To any community members joining us today who may be new to clinical trials, today's discussion will have a lot of great information for you. And moving forward, please consider our institute to be an informational resource for any questions you may have about clinical trials at UW. Each year around Clinical Trials Day, we host a session that highlights a groundbreaking clinical trial at UW. The trial you will hear more about today certainly fits that description. And this session provides perspectives from a researcher as well as a participant to help us better understand the opportunities and challenges involved in participating in a clinical trial. However, today we are very honored to be joined by two participants for the first time. Um, with that, would like to welcome our panelists, Dr. Dixon Kaufman, Meagan Hahn, and Shawn Wiederhoeft, and our moderator, Tamara Kemkin-Mering. Many thanks to all of you for taking the time to join us today. For the audience, as we move along, please add any questions to the Q&A section or to the chat, and we'll address them during the Q&A portion of the program. Also, please note that this session is being recorded and will be shared with all registrants after the fact. And without further ado, I will hand it off to Tamara to get us started.
Thanks, Kevin. I was thinking the exact same thing. We are very lucky today because we have two patient participants that we're able to hear from. And I think both sides are very interesting and right, you couldn't have done it alone. So it's quite a partnership. My name is Tamara Kemkin-Mering. I am the clinical nurse specialist on the clinical research unit at UW Health. There's a location at University Hospital and then also at East Park Medical Center. I've been a clinical research nurse for about 30 years, started in allergy and asthma research as a new graduate RN, made my way to the clinical research unit where I was a direct care nurse for patients and participants on clinical trials. And then about, I guess, probably close to 10 years ago, moved into the clinical nurse specialist role. I really appreciate Kevin, Sarah, and the Clinical Trials Institute for including me in these presentations, especially the Clinical Trials Day Forum, because it really is one of my favorites to hear from the patients and participants that we work with, because really, you guys, Meagan and Shawn, are why we do what we do at the end of the day. So I think you'll hear this a million times during the presentation, but thank you. We're going to talk with Dr. Kaufman, with Shawn, with Meagan about their experience. Like Kevin said, throw your questions in the chat. As we're going through, sometimes I'd like to interject my own questions, but again, just sharing the experience about this clinical trial, what it meant both to Meagan and Shawn, and the relationship with Dr. Kaufman. So moving on, Dr. Kaufman, I'm going to turn over to you to tell us about the trial, about why you do what you do every day, and kind of how you got to this place.
Sure. Thanks, Tamara. I hope I'm coming through loud and clear to everybody. And it's a pleasure to be with everybody today. And I'm looking forward to talking about this really interesting clinical trial. I am a kidney transplant surgeon at the University of Wisconsin. I've been here for 15 years. And Kidney transplantation helps individuals that have kidney disease that either forces them to be on dialysis or will progress to a point where in very short order they will need to go on dialysis if they don't get a kidney transplant. And individuals that receive a kidney transplant are not uncommon. There are about 25,000 transplants done per year in the United States. We do about 300 kidney transplants here at Wisconsin and have had a kidney transplant program for 60 years. And in fact, more than 12,000 people have gotten a kidney transplant here. But all of those patients need anti-rejection medicine to take for life to prevent the body from rejecting that kidney, which is not considered part of themselves. And our body is programmed to reject the kidney. And so we've always felt that an important advance in our field would be to develop a system where it was no longer necessary for an individual to have to take immunosuppression lifelong to have good quality kidney transplant function. And in order to try to reach that goal, it's necessary to have a well-organized method of testing what one believes to be a good process or system to reach that goal. And that's what we refer to as a clinical trial. And clinical trials come in different stages. Stage one is sort of a single center experimenting. Stage two is when a couple of centers get involved. And stage three, or phase three, which we were involved in, involves numerous centers where patients are randomized either by flipping a coin. One set of patients will get the treatment to test whether no anti-rejection medicine is needed, and the other group will continue along the normal course, and then this information is compared. So we get really good comparative data. And that was the trial that Shawn and Meagan were involved in. So that's kind of a little bit of a background of who I am, what we're doing, why we're doing it, how it's done. And we're so fortunate to have Shawn and Meagan with us that can talk a little bit more. So I'll stop at this moment and then expand in any direction that I can to further complement our discussion today.
Dr. Kaufman, how did you get into transplant medicine, and how did you get into carrying out clinical trials?
I got into transplantation because I saw that going on around me as a medical student at the University of Minnesota that had a very strong transplant program. And I got involved in a research project trying to cure diabetes through transplantation and learned about immunology and what a huge impact transplantation can have on people's lives. And it's really that goal to help improve people's lives that have had some really tough setbacks and get them on a normal course so they can enjoy all the things us healthy people almost take for granted.
And regarding this particular clinical trial, what do you think the information that is or was gained for this trial will mean in the future of transplantation moving forward?
Well, the overall goal of trying to perform transplants without the need for permanent anti-rejection medicine has been sometimes referred to as the Holy Grail. This is like a huge reach, and it's been very, very hard to achieve. And we are learning from this trial that it is possible to achieve it in a randomized phase 3 study that is very rigorous, that is giving us better insight as to how to take it up higher and higher and involve more and more people. Clinical trials, by their very nature, are pretty small, as this one is. Interestingly, it involved a total of 17 different transplant centers. And so it demonstrated that it can spread to many different transplant centers and that they are capable of doing this safely and effectively. And that was a big advance.
I think that's a really important point that it was able to be carried out at more than one location because should this become our new standard of care for practice, if it's not practical and doable in real life, a clinical trial and findings from clinical trials only get us so far. So that must have been very inspiring to see the other areas that were carrying this out, how they were able to do it, and that, yeah, maybe this can work and be the new way moving forward.
That is important, not only for that reason, there's one other reason. All of us, all these 17 centers are staying connected. We're communicating with one another. We're very curious to see, well, how are our patients doing now, year 4, year 5? How durable is this? And so we're sort of all learning this together, and it's forming like a really good group, which we can take this even further.
I think the collaboration in clinical trials and, like you said, the learning from each other just cannot be understated because you go in, maybe you think you know what might happen, but then you put actual people in and kind of all bets are off. Like we do have to do the work to see what's happening, and being able to have those collaborative relationships is so important in clinical research. Can you talk a little bit about two things? One, if somebody was interested in the transplant space, in being in a clinical trial, how does that present itself? And then my second question is, can you talk a little bit about why diverse patient populations, not only in transplant clinical trials, but clinical trials in general, is so important?
Yeah, very good questions. For the first one, how do people know that there's a clinical trial? There's kind of two buckets that this falls in. The first bucket, I think, was akin to what Shawn and Meagan went through. So Shawn came to our center to be evaluated for a kidney transplant. I don't think he even was aware that we were enrolling patients in the study. So during his evaluation, I talked to him and I told him, we're doing something kind of interesting here in a clinical trial, and we'd like to talk to you about whether it might be of interest to you. And Megan, who is going to be your kidney donor, because she would need to be involved as well. And so we kind of just started from, ground zero and just introduced the option to him because we believe that everybody who's being evaluated for kidney transplant here should be aware of all the options on how that is done, whether it involves a clinical trial or no clinical trial, and then leave it up to them to decide what they're more comfortable with once they're informed. So that is kind of how most patients sort of know about it, just at the grassroots level. Now, once studies happen and there's publications, people kind of hear about it, and maybe through social media and other things, they realize, hey, there's something interesting going on at the University of Wisconsin. And now people self-refer themselves to come to UW and say, hey, can you tell me more about this trial I heard about or read about? Is it still ongoing? Is there a possibility of being involved? And that's kind of the second way that it happens. Regarding the access to trials and diversity, really, really important because individuals needing a kidney transplant, come in all ages, shapes, sizes, colors, beliefs. And it's important for studies to represent the whole universe of individuals waiting for a transplant so that we know that particular studies are equally applicable, that everybody either gets the same outcomes, or if there's some slightly different outcomes based on some factor, that we're aware of that, and it's not a surprise when these things expand up. And so all those things are very important to make the study relevant.
Thank you. So you kind of described how you first met Shawn. We're going to turn to Shawn now. And Shawn, I want you to tell your story. I'm curious, when Dr. Kaufman, comes in to see you, you're being evaluated for a kidney transplant, and he says, "Hey, how about a clinical trial?" What experience did you have with clinical trials? Was this a surprise?
Yeah, so my experience with clinical trials was really nothing. I've never, I've heard, I think there's a place in town that I would hear Covance or something, they would do things, but really I had no idea, the clinical trial world. So the first time I heard about it was even before that. Megan gave me a call once, and I think she was telling me about she had gone through all the tests, and she was going to be a perfect match. And she was letting me know, that I think it was, that she was a match. And then she was like, and there's this, my coordinator was telling me about this interesting study, and I could sense like there was something very interesting she was going to reveal. And then that was the first time I heard about it. And then, of course, when I went to the appointment, with Kaufman and the rest of my coordinator and stuff, then learned even more about it.
Is she your older sister?
Yeah, I have two older sisters. So she's my oldest sister. And then we have one between Brina.
And so she's probably dragged you around to different adventures throughout your entire life. This is just another one of
Yeah, I
them.
think we got photo evidence of a lot of, yeah.
Okay. All right, Shawn, just tell us a little bit who you are. Why are you here sharing this story with us? And what happened?
Yeah, so I'm Shawn, Wiederhoeft. And yeah, so I had been up until maybe freshman year of high school, I just kind of never knew I had a condition. And then switched out of my pediatrician doctor to a new doctor, and they did a simple, I think it was just a urine test, and they found, I remember if it was protein in the urine or something. So then I got all these tests done at the UW way back then. And I remember very well because it was 9/11 that I was there. So it was just a very memorable day in many ways. And yeah, so then they think, I don't know if they ever came upon the concrete diagnosis, but it was like I think what I've understood it as is renal artery stenosis. So one of my kidneys, sure Kaufman could describe this better, but one of my kidneys just the arteries didn't develop. And then so anyway, so I lived, until probably like I lived a long time where it was just keeping an eye on it. And then yeah, it was probably 2019 that my nephrologist, also at the UW, kind of was like, all right, like, we'd always keep track of the numbers, and obviously a slow decline, and you just hope it, holds out. But then eventually he was like, all right, this is at the point where we need to, this would be the next step as a transplant. So then referred me to the UW Transplant Center.
So, you go through the process, you're kind of in holding pattern for a while, and then this discussion happens that says, okay, now's the time to start looking into this, which is not, from my limited understanding of the transplant world, easy, right? It's not without a lot of sacrifice on somebody's behalf. What were you thinking when, okay, time is now, transplant, let's go?
Yeah, I think well, part of it was uh yeah, it was a lot to process, obviously. But I do think I had always felt really confident with my nephrologist, Dr. Chan at the UW dialysis clinic. So from the beginning of that, I always felt like, okay, well, no matter what happens, like these are like, top talented medical professionals that are helping me. And then from there, obviously my family is incredibly supportive. So I remember telling them, which was like, a hard thing to reveal, I mean, they all knew I had the condition, but to finally say, "Oh, okay, this is happening now." But then going to the UW, I think even from the first appointments, um, I never like, I'm always tend to be a hopeful, optimistic person. So I'm always trying to like, just take what comes. And, but yeah, my coordinator there, I remember just from getting even the pamphlet of like, this is how you spread the news online, all the different ways and everything. So I felt like there was real things that I could be doing to, and then my family and, people are just amazing and spreading the news, or, the need for a kidney for me and stuff like that. So I think the whole time I just felt very part of a team, whether it was family, whether it was medical team, so I think it was certainly a scary time, but it was also like I had seen it coming forever. Or, you hope it doesn't, but I kind of sensed, so yeah, eventually it was just kind of like, all right, this is what we're gonna do now.
And Dr. Kaufman, your sister had kind of talked to you a little bit about, hey, there's a study, and then Dr. Kaufman brings it up for real. And what are your thoughts at that time when he brings up a trial?
I was uh I was really curious. I'm just like I love, I mean, I've always liked science fiction and anything, so to me, it was also just hearing about it. And once I got the sense that this is quite a big change from the normal procedure, um, yeah, I thought it was really interesting. And from when Megan had told me, I could tell that she was interested in some degree. So if she wasn't interested, I would have, not. So I think it was just, um, yeah, it was, yeah. And then once I kind of learned, so at first it was a lot of like, oh, curiosity, excitement. And then, the reality of when you're actually looking at the sheets with the risks and everything, that was when, was like, okay, yeah, like this is a real thing. And it's not always a sure bet. It's a good trial for a reason, right? So, but the team did a great job of just being extremely transparent and letting no pressure, letting me kind of decide for myself. So yeah, I thought that was also a very um, reassuring part of it, was just never feeling like, nudged one way or the other.
And that consent process, I mean, I've thought about it in my role numerous times that you're already under a heavy emotional burden. And now we say, here's 50 pages with a lot of words and a lot of scary things. You want to sign up? And so I appreciate you sharing that experience, because that is a real part of clinical trials. There are unknowns. And so to be able to even just get through some of that paperwork sometimes is probably a days long process.
Yeah.
When you read the consent form, what were your main concerns about participating?
I think the main thing was, I remember like there was a couple of the risks that were like, I would even imagine they were just general risks with any kind of like transplant surgery. So some of it was like, well, this sounds serious, but also like some of it I think was just going to be, you'd have to deal with either way. And then I think to me the biggest one that stood out was there was a radiation treatment. And at first it's like, whoa, like that's kind of like, pretty far out there. But I remember even with that, I met with part of the process was I met with I don't remember if she was the head of the radiation department, or she had some, one of the key players in the radiation department. And she sat me down and walked through it and gave me, also a nice transparent overview. And yeah, while it was like a low dose of radiation, they, obviously wanted to be clear that like it still is something. And yeah, so I think, yeah, so that was, sorry, kind of missing I forgot what your initial part of your.
No, it was just kind of like, what's the thing that really stood out, or just the whole feeling around, right? Like, what is going to be the risk related to the clinical trial? And what is also, like you said, transplant itself has its own set of risks, and, kind of not being so afraid that you're like, wait a minute, nope, not going to do this. And it sounds like people were able to answer your questions, in that you had the support of not only your family, but the staff at UW, whether it was radiation, nephrology, transplant.
Yep, yep. And I did see, I think Kaufman even showed me an article, or at some point I saw an article of the previous, I think they were sisters from for the UW that they had done. So
Okay.
also seeing like, okay, like this is like, yeah. So yeah, I knew it was risky, but also like you don't, on one hand, it's also like, well, you're going to be going through a transplant also. So like, but I did appreciate the very transparent, the transparency of, of letting me know. But yeah, the radiation for me was the biggest thing. But even that wasn't, yeah, it never was like, I didn't have to think about it too much, but it was something. And I was very appreciative of how much they, walked me through the different things.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. Can you tell us overall your experience with the trial? Was it what you expected? What were the things that happened that you didn't expect?
Yeah, I think um, looking back on it, I think I've been very fortunate that the clinical trial process, the transplant, like everything has gone as well as could have, hoped for. Um, I think for me, and it was interesting because I know Megan's like her contributions for the trial were more, up till the actual surgery, there's more things that she was doing. So that was required of her. And for me, it was, after the transplant for like the radiation treatment and stuff like that. But so I think it was all very well laid out. And I think looking back on trials in general, like, or if I was thinking about trials in general, I think the way that it was laid out so well, and then everything felt so professional. Like anybody that had a hand in the trial or had a hand in an appointment, it was never like, oh, was this, like there was never a sense of like somebody not being on the same page as others. So I think that was just a really memorable and important part of the experience, just like the professionalism all around. But I think the part that I remember hitting me the most was just like I knew the radiation would be a thing, but I felt so good after the surgery. Like the next day, I remember talking to a friend on my phone in the room, and I just felt great. Um, and then once I think it was, I forget when, but once I started the radiation, it's I think it was each day for a series of, I forget how many days, but just like the slow energy drain from that was for me like the biggest thing. And it wasn't, I'm sure certain that was, it was, I was known that, or I knew that would be a thing, but it wasn't until like I was really going through it. And I think it just contrasted with how great I felt after the surgery. So, yeah, so for me, it was really that part of it was like, whoa, like this is, um, taxing after a while. And, once the final treatment ended, I regained my strength. But that for me was like the biggest, uh, kind of, and it wasn't unexpected, but it was, like I said, I think it was just my mind was like so, like I just felt so great, and then all of a sudden it was like I was slowly kind of hitting that, that part.
It is like an energy drain. You're absolutely right. So you had mentioned earlier that, prior to this, you've heard some ads for Covance, you heard the word clinical trial. Um, After your experience, can you tell us why you think participation in clinical trials matters?
Yeah. Well, I think like for one, the everything that I take for granted just for regular medicine and appointments, little treatments I've had, like it's all built onto like the shoulders of those who've come before us. And like, so I think for one, it's like, um, yeah, it's to have a chance to be a part of something that is, hopefully going to help, those that come after, or or even those that are, alongside our timeline. So I think that's, to me, the biggest thing is just like, if there's, it's just a way to be a part of something greater than ourselves. And yeah, and I think, yeah, so that I think that's really kind of my biggest thing with it is it's just uh for all the blessings that medicine has given us, it's like it's a way to, be a part of something that hopefully will be that way for us, help others.
Right. And I think for a lot of us on the call today who are the people working in clinical trials, that's why we do it too, to be a part of something bigger and to make a difference in the future. And without folks like you and Meagan, those breakthroughs might not be made.
Mm.
Um, can you tell us about some misconceptions about clinical trials that you may have had before going through this experience? When you hear those ads, what are you thinking and how did that compare to what really happened with you?
Sure. Yeah, I think um when I think maybe for me, some of the misconceptions are just like, it's kind of a rogue, uh, you're like, all right, what's going to happen? The Wild West of medicine. And I never really thought that, but I think that would be how that to me, it would be like, oh, it's like a risky area of medicine that's like, but then I think when you have like, with this study, it's so, like I said, the professionalism it's all so dialed in, and it's so like transparent and honest, and nobody is trying to fool you or like trying to nudge you. And then when you have like the weight of like the UW hospital name behind it, um, like I don't know anything about the Covance thing, but I think some like the name certainly, like when you have a name to the backing of a study, for me, that's like a big thing also. Um, but then, yeah, I think once I learned more about the study, you see like how, um, yeah, how there is an experimental phase to it. Obviously, it's a trial, but like the all the work that has gone into like to getting to where it now is ready for humans, I think is something that I remember just like kind of taking in. And I think that's also maybe a misconception among some people is the just not really seeing that. And then, and just thinking it's, um, yeah, that's kind of where my head would go with it.
Okay. Do you feel like there were barriers to your participation? Do you have suggestions for those of us in the clinical research world how we could make the process easier?
I mean, I don't want to like pat you guys too much on the back, but like it really was a great, like for me, it really was a good experience for, um, you know, front to back, like the whole thing. So I think, yeah, I that one is kind of tough for me. I think, maybe outwardly, like just the awareness in general beyond, my participation in it, which I know ties into funding and everything like that. Maybe that's a whole different conversation, but yeah, yeah. But no, to be honest, it was, I'm also local. I'm in Madison where it was
True.
happening.
Yep.
So I'm sure I had, a little bit of an easier path with it than people that are traveling for it.
Right. Um, how did it feel to have your sister participating with you?
Yeah, I mean, like I would never have wanted to, have to take my sister's kidney or be given my sister's kidney. But of all the people to to be in with this with, it's like I couldn't ask for a better, at this point, I feel like, partners in this. And I always remember like when we were kids, we took a family trip to Yosemite National Park, and me and her somehow got separated from the rest of our family, and it was night, and it was just like we were kind of lost in the park, and she somehow found her way back. But like I remember not even being afraid, just kind of like, oh, we're like, and so ever since then too, it's like, you always have like your older sisters, but then through this, it's just like just another moment where she, just stood up and, kind of the permanent big sister protector. So I think, yeah, it's extra special.
That's wonderful. What advice would you have for somebody who was in your situation when this, back in 2019?
Yeah, for like, for as far as the like looking into considering a trial.
Yep, yep.
Yeah. I think it's really easy for me to want to overlook the scary things that that would come with something like this. So for me, like the risks, it would be like on one hand, I would rather not know. But I also knew that like I need to be 100% confident in whatever decision I make. So I think the biggest advice that I would give is taking the time to really read through and like absorb everything, even the things that are, the risks, like the good and the bad. Um, and then, yeah, just weighing it all out and then really just, and of course, in this case, it's not just me, so it's my sister. Um, but like making that decision and then just not second guessing and just moving forward confidently and like because at that point, um, yeah, I think you just have to then trust, the team around you. And so I think for me, the advice is really just, yeah, not being afraid to be a little afraid, I guess, of what you're
Right.
reading, but
Yeah.
like, yeah,
Yeah.
but then yeah, yeah.
All right, Megan, we're gonna talk to you for a little while. So,
Awesome.
can you introduce yourself? We know how you know Shawn now, and
Yes, yes.
just kind of tell us your side of the story.
Sure. So I'm Meagan Hahn. I'm Sean's oldest sister. Brina is our middle. Um, and so Sean's been my little brother since I was about 6. So we have about 6 years apart. Oddly enough, my 2 kids, I have a daughter, Leona. She's 6 years older than her younger brother, Louis. And so at the time of all of this, as this was all going on, there were just so many times where like I'd see them and it was just, I don't know, just very interesting life, mimicking life. But so Shawn and I, truly like all growing up, like Shawn said, we knew he had a condition but it didn't, highly affect what we saw of his life. It didn't, but he was very well aware of this and was they were monitoring that. And then I remember when he, shared the information that he was going to need a transplant. It just kind of everything from there to now is kind of it's just such a story. And I know everyone has a health story and everyone's is unique. So to be able to be here today with everyone, I'm very proud. I'm a proud big sister. I think that sums it up.
So, what were your thoughts when you heard the news that, okay, we've been watching this for a while, but again, it's go time, time to take the next pretty big step.
Yeah. So when we heard that he needed the transplant, he shared the process of like how to apply. And I know I was one of many people. And I had friends reach out to me saying, "Hey, I just want you to know I filled out the application." And we have a cousin who actually contacted me after and said, "Hey, if you want out, I'm in," which was like, just like, you knew you had the support. So he had layers of support. And you knew you had an out. But at that moment, I went through the process because it was almost, I tend to, in this particular case, I just had a very strong conviction. I can't say anything except that I was like, it was like, you're going to do this. You're just going to do it. You're going to step through the next, and we didn't know what was coming at all. So I didn't even know if I would be a match. So applied, We had a lot of conversations like on the sides and, but we just didn't know. So it was just like the next step. And then the next door would open and then you decide, do we step through that door? And it was just constant like that for a while. I would say almost up to surgery. There were like little doors where it's like, okay, here's the next part. Here's the next part. So.
And it seems like you might have heard about the trial before, Shawn. So how did you hear about it? And then what kind of thoughts started going through your head when you heard about it?
Sure. So I had gotten a call from my coordinator, so the transplant coordinator for donors. So she had called me, and she was really coordinating everything on the end of all these donors, like just sorting out like who could be a potential match, that type of thing, or who do we even like work with on this. And when the information came back that I was a perfect sibling match, and our sister also applied, she was not a match at all. So it, in a way, I think there were certain things that just really helped it to keep our eyes focused on like, okay, well, that takes care of that issue. Like who's gonna donate. So for me then, the coordinator then said, I think it was in the same call actually, she said, so you're a perfect sibling match, and also because of that there's this clinical trial, and she described it to me. And just on the back end of this, kind of a piece of information that helped me in that moment was I had a friend and colleague that I knew well, when I was teaching. I was a teacher, and I remember sitting in her office with her, and she had at about age, I think around like age 24, she had a transplant. She was the recipient from her sister, and she had a pill box, and it had all of her medications. And she had other health issues as well, but she was sharing with, one day she was just taking her medication, and we were just talking. And I just remember thinking, she was the same age as me, and we were in our 30s. And I just remember thinking, wow, like how, and she then would share with me different things with her health. And one of the things was the medications that were hard on her body. And she was young to have the transplant. And so she had a life of medication ahead of her. So she even now will sometimes reach out and just say like how amazing this is. Because that for her, so when I heard about the clinical trial, I had already had a little bit of information about the anti-rejection medications, immunosuppressants. So when I heard it, I think there was this little piece in my brain that was like, ooh, we got to know more about that. And then from there, the information, like Dr. Kaufman was saying, they shared the information with us, and I could share it with Shawn. I think I think my coordinator wanted me to know first, so that there wasn't pressure. And I think that's one thing that's really important with the whole process, because of between family dynamics or ethics or different things, empowering me to say, yeah, don't bring that up, or say, hey, yeah, I'm interested in learning more. That then when I shared it with Shawn, it was like, yeah, let's talk about this. And it didn't feel like I was being surprised by it, or that there was any pressure. There was no pressure except for my own pressure of like, I want to, let's try this. If Shawn wanted to, I was game.
And then once you guys kind of decided that, yep, we're going to go through with this, what did you think was going to happen? How did you think it was going to play out? And were the expectations or real, or what kind of wasn't what you expected?
I think it's interesting because I think from the start, Dr. Kaufman he sat with me and explained, and I remember, like Shawn said, he explained the risks. And from a donor perspective, it's very different. For me, it was kind of like, yeah, I'm healthy. I'm already doing, for me, it was like, I decided I would do the transplant, the donation, this part was just kind of a little extra, if that makes sense. But what I would say, I had nothing preconceived at that moment to think like, well, how will this go? So it was almost just, like I said, kind of like, hey, we're going on a little bit of an adventure. Let's just see what happens, because I think at that point I felt committed. I personally at that time I kind of say it like God cleared my schedule because I had just left my job a couple years ago or years prior. I had a 1-year-old at home. I was in mom mode. So I think I had that feeling of like, this is something we can make out of a hard time. We can bring good to something. So I didn't have a huge idea of what was coming. I will say the thing I don't think any of us were prepared for was it was 2020. So 2019, we started learning about this. And then 2020 came. And with COVID, I think that's when, for me, that's when it was like a little more stressful because I had stem cells on ice, like it, sitting somewhere where I was like, is this going to make us not be able to move forward or, all the different things. And I think just in general, it just caused a little bit more like there were just different things we had to kind of work with, schedule changes or who can be at what or what are the precautions and all of that. But so I don't think anything about our transplant is very normal in that sense that it was COVID era. But from everything else, I don't think there were too many things that I would say it was just it was very well organized. There was a lot of communication at that time with the study coordinator on my end. So there were days where I felt like we were back and forth quite a bit to just make sure, that there's all these, with a study, all the rules of like, it has to be done just like this and the timing has to be right and all the things. So I don't have too much that was a surprise, except just it was wild. The whole thing was a bit wild.
Can you tell us why you think participation in clinical trials matters in general?
Um, oh yeah. I mean, if you think of anything that we now take for granted to, when we go in for medical care, I mean, when you think back, even just 100 years ago, what people, I think of just things that people had to handle and deal with, that when we hear different things now, it doesn't feel like a death sentence when you hear about certain things and we've now seen like, oh, I know so many people who've donated a kidney or who've received a kidney that it's like, oh, this is it's amazing where we've come from, but it wouldn't be there if people didn't try. And I know I want to just say Brenda and Barb were the names of the two sisters. I looked it up because I want to say when Shawn was mentioning them, the sitting down and having Dr. Kaufman explain this study to us, and he shared the article, and to know you're not the first ones at that site was so encouraging. And so I want to just give them credit because they were the first ones. And that even more so, that's scarier yet. But just, I think it's so important that, like I said, I think giving purpose to our suffering, like, hey, this is hard, but something good down the road could come from this. So I think, and I'm speaking from a donor, so I don't want to put words in Shawn's mouth, but I think for the two of us to be able to like share that information so that maybe someday it'll be different. Or maybe not, but we can rule something out or we can work with something else. There's always findings that can benefit somebody.
Exactly. And, I'll tell my kids, you don't need to find what you want to do in life. It's just important to find what you don't want to do. And in clinical trials, we might
Yes.
want the answer, but we also might just find, ooh, this was not a good idea. And now we need to pivot. And I
Yes.
also love your purpose from suffering. That, I mean, of course, we don't want anyone to suffer, but if we just sit around today and don't do anything, it's not going to be good. It's just not going to be good.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the misconceptions that you have had or that maybe you've heard about related to participating in a clinical trial? Shawn, you kind of referred to the Wild West, right? Are people out there going rogue? Like we've all heard the term guinea pig, which just breaks my heart. But there are misconceptions. Did you have misconceptions, Meagan?
I think a little bit more of I think for me, um, I don't come from a huge background in medicine, and I have been healthy, thankfully. But one of the things I would say is like something that I would say might be, for me at least, was that like this doesn't apply to me. Like when you hear about clinical trials, it's kind of like that's for those other people in that other town or that other situation. Doesn't apply to me. And I can see that even for other health things, like that doesn't apply to me because I don't know, it's not mainstream. Um, and then, or that it's not accessible to me because it's happening somewhere else. And Shawn said, he's local to Madison. I'm in Milwaukee or Wauwatosa area. So, um, just, I think that could be a misconception that I might have had, is just like, is this even and then I think the other part is just like lack of awareness.
Mhm.
You hear about it and like it's a separate thing from your normal healthcare. Um, and those would be the biggest things for me, I think.
Okay. Did you find that there were barriers to your participation, or do you have suggestions about, hey, this might make it easier for people?
Yeah, I thought about this one a lot for some reason. I think because for one thing, the way things came together for us, the number of things that had to come together for this particular outcome, it's incredible. Even down to just like very, very specific things. But one of the things I would say, um, one of the things I would say is that when we're okay, say the question again so I make sure I'm answering the right one.
Just what were barriers to
Yeah.
participation, or how could things be easier?
So for me, we thankfully it was distance was one thing that I think it was not a huge deal, but I had a 1-year-old, so I was like trying to figure out, how to handle that. But we had a good support system of people who could help out with things. But I think for others, location would be a big thing. And so if you're not near a site that you can have these things done, just making sure that people have that it's accessible, or helping them with those elements of the study or getting to where they need to be. And then the other thing I think is like some people don't have a strong support system, or they have even a fear. I mean, there's a lot of misinformation out there, maybe a little bit of a fear of medicine, or that type of thing. And I think culturally, when you look at all different groups of people, I like that Dr. Kaufman said, relevance need or studies to be relevant, they have to be like inclusive, and they have to be broad. And I think I can see it from like our little situation, but for the whole, there's a lot of people who just getting to their normal appointments may be a stretch. And so really trying to care for the communities where it's like, hey, we want more people to feel comfortable with this and supported. And how do we do that? And I think a lot of it is, location, and then care of like daily, like how do you leave your job, or how do you, like we had remote, I don't know, we were remote partly because of COVID. But like at that time, I was a stay-at-home mom. I wasn't working full time. So, all the different pieces. So just, I think, being aware of like, what are the needs of your individual groups, and how do you help bridge that for them?
Right, right. Same question to you. How did it feel to participate with Shawn?
I mean, it felt like, it was definitely a bonding experience. It felt like kind of like we were living in an alternate reality a bit. Like it was just looking back, it was a very sweet time because we talked all the time. It was just a lot of times where I remember Shawn, he just said like, he didn't have, he kind of would just take it as it comes. And I was the one who was like, wait, what's the schedule? I need to know which day are we doing, And so, and I think having his calm presence, and he's the one who was having, I was healthy going into this. He was not. So I think it was a very special, looking back, it's our story now. I mean, that's just, it now is part of our fibers. And so, and then even for our family, like our parents, our sister, my husband, my in-laws, like our extended family. It was a very special, like I would say, like an adventure, and it turned out to be a really wonderful outcome. But yeah, it was a very wild time, but I'm very grateful that we have this story to share.
And what advice would you have for someone facing a similar situation to this related to clinical trials and participating?
Yeah, I would say one is just have honest conversations and like, be honest about your questions. Don't No question is dumb. And even with your team, like your family, your caregivers, just being honest. I think there was times I remember my mom at one point being like, do you want to do this? And just asking a very honest question. And I was like, I want to do this, and being able to have a moment where pause, and be honest about it. And then for me, I think building a team, and for us, it was like we had people from church, from school, from our family, friends. We had people, strangers, being supportive, which was wonderful. But then, if you can't, my advice would be, if I know there's people who don't have that built into their, like your family, or there's different dynamics. And for that, I would say there's so many groups out there now to be supportive. And like, I have friends now that I have because of donating a kidney. I have one who may be on here today. I just met her. She donated on Tuesday.
Oh,
And she might be listening. I don't know. But just supporting each other. And I think if you don't have it built in, and that for on the medical end of it, if you can encourage people to find those groups. I mean, we give social media a bad rap because a lot of times but there's a lot out there that's good. I mean, Shawn said, they said post this on social media to find a donor. But I think just if that's something that, just being aware of, like, there's people who want to help and want to support each other. And once you are in these groups where, there's ways to find support if you can't do it within like just your family or things like that. But also, you do need support. You need people to talk to besides just your doctor.
right, right. So, kind of just a wrap-up question for each of you before we go to questions. Dr. Kaufman, what's next for you? Other transplant trials on the horizon, currently ongoing?
Well, UW has very strong interest in advancing the field in transplantation. Many of you are aware that UW created the organ preservation solution that is currently being used, and that's like 40 years. This trial is kind of an example of trying to push the field as far up the hill that we can to make it more perfect for more people. One of the concerns about organ transplantation, especially as we become more successful and more people can benefit, is we don't have enough organs for transplantation. So we need to think creatively, how do we transplant more people? Many people have heard in the news the field of xenotransplantation, or pig kidneys going into a human being. That is ongoing. We've participated in some early trials in large animal studies. We call those preclinical studies before the clinical trials. Phase 1 single center clinical trials are ongoing. We are connected with some of those groups, and could possibly be a second or third study in a phase 2 study in xenotransplantation. Another really interesting area that has evolved relatively recently is, once an organ is removed from a deceased donor, not a living donor, but a deceased donor, and before it travels to the transplant center to be transplanted, it kind of takes a stop in the middle, and the organ goes on a perfusion system that pumps like warm blood and oxygen and nutrients through it to rejuvenate it, regenerate it, improve it, for several hours before it actually gets implanted into a person, and the organ then works faster and better. And that is being applied now to several kinds of organs. So transplanting more organs, transplanting organs that work better, and also transplanting individuals with fewer to no medications. Those are the areas in which UW is committed to pushing the field forward.
That's very exciting. And then Shawn and Meagan. Shawn, I'll start with you. Would you participate in another clinical trial? Why or why not?
Yeah, I think for me to absolutely, and it would be, but I think when I was thinking about like this idea, it would be dependent, like each one would be kind of its own thing, right? So like kind of go through the whole process again, kind of like all the questions you would have, but like I think if it's if it's a well-run study and you read it over and you and like my gut instinct, and I wanted to do it, I absolutely would. There wouldn't be a reason, that I wouldn't if everything lined up.
Right. Meagan, how about you?
Yeah, I agree with Shawn. I think for me, I had a very different, there wasn't as much as stake, I don't think, for me. Shawn had a bigger end of that, the trial part. But I really think the care that or at least the care I received with the clinical trial, I think was just so good. I would do the same thing though, and I would just treat it like looking at it all fresh and new and trying to have the right information so I could make a decision. And also the time of life. I think for me, the last time it just worked out perfectly, time of life, all that. So I think I would try and treat it like, okay, now with this particular situation, what would it be? And just
Right.
have your facts and make your decision.
All right. Anything that the three of you would like to throw in here at the end before we go to questions? Any last comments?
I think, well, I'll just say one thing that I feel like I say it whenever I'm talking about it, but for me, like the biggest praise for the study is just like I am able to live a normal life and like the idea that I even went through that is this very nostalgic, sweet period, like Meagan was saying. Um, but it was, because of all the effort of so many people. And yeah, so I think, yeah, just the ability to feel like it never even happened is such a, like, I don't know, like to me, that's just such a, just a lot of praise for for the study and the trial.
I would just add that, as mentioned earlier, undergoing a transplant is a big deal unto itself without a clinical trial, both for recipient and donor. And then to be asked to consider something sophisticated like this that there's not a whole lot of experience with. There's some real big upside, but you don't know exactly what the downside is. And of course, nobody wants to do something unsafe, but they want to get the most out of what they're having, and to be able to process that and then have sort of the presence of mind to also say, I'm going to be involved. Not only maybe I'll benefit, but what is learned, this new knowledge may help everybody else going forward is really quite important, and helps bring this to more people. And for Shawn and Meagan to be such solid people to talk about their experiences and share this with others says a great deal about them.
I agree. So there are a couple of questions. The first question is, I think that this would be for Dr. Kaufman. Shawn seems to be a patient with a physical cause of the renal failure, not an underlying autoimmune disease. And one of the earliest patients in 1967 also had a physical type renal failure, who survived for greater than 30 years with no immunosuppression. Have patients with underlying autoimmunity done as well as patients like Shawn with a physical disease basis? Is that a question to answer? Do you have an answer for that?
Yes, that is an insightful question from somebody who's familiar with our program and has probably advanced immunologic knowledge. And what this gets at is that the cause of kidney disease in individuals can be from our own body, our own immune system, having kind of a detrimental effect on our kidneys. And there are some very well described autoimmune diseases that do cause kidney disease. Lupus nephritis is one such autoimmune disease many of us have heard about. Another one that is more common to cause renal disease that maybe people haven't heard so much about is called IgA nephropathy. And when there's an autoimmune component to causing kidney injury, the question is, without the anti-rejection medicines that can suppress the autoimmune response, will there be kind of a recurrent autoimmune injury imparted on the new kidney? Now, this is not of concern for Shawn. He does not have an autoimmune disease, but several people in the study did have autoimmune diseases. And the proportions were not equal among what we call the control group and the treatment group. 6 people in the treatment group had an autoimmune, only 1 in the control group. And of the 6 people with an autoimmune disease, 2 of them did have some evidence of injury of their transplanted kidney that showed up a couple years after the transplant that was diagnosed, and then they were put back on a small amount of anti-rejection medicine or immunosuppression to actually suppress the autoimmune component so that their kidney would be protected and they could carry on. So in the end, I think those individuals do require careful observation. They need to now be aware that it may be necessary to replace some of the anti-rejection medicines, but it's not very common. And in the entire study, at the 2-year mark, those people who had developed what we call the chimerism from the donor cells going in, 19 of the 20 developed the chimerism, and 15 of the 19 continued off all anti-rejection medicine for 2 additional years. And we're in the process of working with our other centers to find out how they're doing 4 and 5 years out. And the other patients had to go on a small amount of anti-rejection medicine. But everybody's alive and well with a functioning kidney transplant.
Okay.
Sorry, Tam, I just wanted to jump in. There was a question in the Q&A section. Someone asking if Dr. Kaufman could talk a little bit more about the process of the trial, what was actually involved with it, and maybe what the outcome was for Shawn. I don't know that we touched on that too much in detail yet.
I can share a diagram that kind of shows what the donor and the recipient procedures are. Is that something you think would be helpful?
Sure.
Okay, let's go to share mode here. Tell me if that is coming up for you. Are you able to see
Yes.
Yep.
the diagram? And you see like the pink donor for female and the blue for
Yep.
A male recipient. So, okay, so this is like Meagan and Shawn here. So the first part of the procedure where it says donor, there's a number 1, it says donor cells collected and processed. So before Meagan even undergoes the surgery to donate her kidney, we're sticking IVs in her arm and drawing her blood into a machine that is going to pull out specialized cells that are going to actually go back into Shawn and create this dual immune system. And the cells can be identified by certain surface markers on the cell surface. And those cells are put aside, kind of banked and frozen down, and just we wait. And then a little while later, the kidney transplant is performed. And the sequence for the kidney transplant is first, the donor, Meagan, would undergo a donor nephrectomy. Her kidney would be taken out of her body. And then the kidney would be, for a couple hours, preserved. And then Meagan's procedure is finished and she leaves the operating room. And then we bring Shawn in and we do the kidney transplant like we normally would do a kidney transplant. And after the transplant is performed, then Shawn undergoes a special, what we call recipient preconditioning to create tolerance or chimerism. And that involves the standard anti-rejection medicines and a special treatment we call total lymphoid irradiation that Shawn alluded to earlier. And this is done on a daily basis. The transplant's done on a Monday, and then he gets the total lymphoid irradiation on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. He goes home, he's discharged from the hospital, his kidney is working. He gets the weekend off, and then he comes back as an outpatient and gets more of the total lymphoid irradiation on Monday, Tuesday, I think 2 on Thursday and Friday. And then after the completion, then we reinfuse or we infuse Meagan cells that were banked. We thaw those out and we just give it to Shawn through a peripheral IV, and they circulate in his bloodstream and home to the bone marrow where they engraft. And then we monitor him over time and periodically take some blood samples to determine if we can pick up evidence that Meagan's cells have engrafted in Shawn. So now Shawn is carrying not only Meagan's kidney, but also some of these circulating immune cells, and we call that chimerism. And that's the key. If you get the chimerism, then it is successfully performed to minimize the anti-rejection medicine. And so then over a period of 6 months, Shawn comes down to one medication. If the chimerism persists, he's doing well, kidneys well, no rejection, no reactions. Then over the next 6 months, the last medication is slowly weaned off. So by 1 year after transplant, he's off all the medications. And then we just keep monitoring him as though just like everybody else with a kidney transplant, and just keep watching and be aware of his labs and taking good care of him, with the big advantage that he doesn't have to take any anti-rejection medicines. So that's kind of the sequence of the events for both the donor and the recipient.
There is a question in the chat, but Dr. Kaufman, what type of education, information sharing, promotion came from the sponsor company to help build awareness for the study? Was it enough to help drive and complete the study enrollment on time, or were you left shorthanded?
The study sponsors tend to have kind of an arm's length relationship with the centers because they don't want to be seen as influencing anything. And they leave the investigators to figure out for themselves, how are they going to enroll people? How are they going to let people know? And in this particular study, it wasn't too difficult. First of all, it was a relatively small study. There were only 30 total patients involved, 20 of which got the tolerance protocol. So there were only 20 that we needed to enroll. So it enrolled pretty fast. But the trick was here that the donor and recipient had to have a very close match. And so And also, all the transplants are from living donors. And so we know in advance, we knew in advance what the donor tissue typings were between donor and recipient. And every time there was like this perfect match, which tend to be siblings, we knew about it. And then we could talk to them specifically saying, hey, you're kind of in a special group here because of your match. And we want to tell you about something specifically aimed towards a pair like yourselves. And so it really wasn't too difficult a problem because we were sort of all hands-on and we knew what to look for. And it was a relatively small study.
There is another question for Dr. Kaufman. With the successful results of this phase 3 study, what are the next steps to advance this technology?
Yeah, that's what's kind of fun to talk about. So the first thing that we're taking on ourselves, this study, when it was published, was just showed 3 years. Now, everybody who've been in the study, they're now out between 5 and 6 years. And so we have what we call an investigator-initiated extension study to find out from the other 16 centers, how how is everybody doing? How durable is this? How long can our patients continue to stay off medications? Or do some of them sometimes need to go back on a medication? And for what reason? And for how long? So that's the first thing, is to find out how durable this is long term. That will help set the stage for additional studies because we'll have more information to tell people on how well people have done for 5 years instead of just 3 years. Now, there's another interesting thing about this kind of study. What we are talking about is kind of the immediate infusion of the donor cells to create chimerism shortly after the kidney transplant's in place. However, there are many, many people who already have had a transplant, but sibling pairs that have this great match, like the 10 people in the control group of this study that didn't get tolerance, and many, many other people out there whose donor is still doing well, they're on immunosuppression, they're well matched, and is there the potential to do what we call a second chance study, to do this procedure in a delayed fashion and to do this, obtain the cells, do the cellular infusion, do the total lymphoid irradiation treatment, and then infuse the cells, monitor for chimerism, and wean them off all immunosuppression 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years after their initial transplant. And that is in development. There have already been some phase 1 studies that are looking quite promising. And those are undergoing review in medical journals for publication, and then that will be shown. And a third area is that some donor-recipient combinations are not perfectly matched. They're sort of half perfect matches. And we have to learn what adjustments and modifications need to be made to try to get a 75% success rate in that combination because it's a higher bar. And those initiatives are ongoing as well.
In that last sentence kind of addresses one of the questions. Would the matching still be similar enough for half siblings?
Yes, that is where some current effort is going right now, is to try to tune the tolerance induction protocol, the medications, the total lymphoid irradiation, and other things to allow the chimerism to take place, which is harder to do when you're not perfectly matched. And then that can be taken to even further mismatched, and even how to apply this in a deceased donor transplant situation. And there's some early investigations into that as well.
What about other trials with other organs with living related donors? Is this being considered in other organs?
There is, And it's actually not a solid organ transplant. It's a cellular transplant to cure diabetes with islet cells from deceased donors. And islet cells, those recipients need the same immunosuppression. The islets are really sensitive, and applying this tolerance induction protocol to recipients of islet transplants for cure or treatment of diabetes is being studied as well.
Let me just look at the questions here. There is one question asking what's the role of pregnancy on the donor side of the story? Um, I'm just going to read the question. I do not understand it. For example, was the child, Meagan's 1-year-old, a boy, and possibly anti-HY on the part of the donor, or if a girl, this pregnancy might not have immunized the donor? I hope I didn't butcher that question.
There's some really fascinating immunology about pregnancy and how the children of the pregnant women can affect their immune system, and it relates to the inheritance between mom and dad, that whose children have some of their immune cells, their tissue typing cells, and some that don't, and how that can affect the immune status of the donor. We did not investigate pregnancies and gender of newborns or any immunological studies to determine if any of those subtle immunological findings played a role in any of the outcomes that we had.